During the days of empire, a nation would subjugate other areas of the world in order to maintain access to resources, labor, and markets to sell finished goods to. This was then backed up with a navy and an army that would secure those trade lanes and access to those goods. After World War II, this was replaced with the Bretton Woods system, whereby the United States would be the sole guarantor of international shipping and security, and everyone else could have access to those resources under a free market system. This meant that nations no longer had to explicitly control the resources in question. They never had to actually control the colony itself, and that's why colonialism ended. All a nation had to do now was be on good terms with the United States and be part of its international system, and they would profit from it just as much as if they were part of the empire themselves. Think of it something like an internationalist free market empire as opposed to a militaristic mercantilist empire. Now, in some sense, if you wanted to look at it this way, you could say these nations are getting over on the United States. The United States is giving up a piece of its pie by allowing its market to be accessed by these other nations. However, the United States felt that this was a good trade since it allowed friendly relations with other advanced economies, security partnerships with these advanced nations, and global stability because now these individual power centers no longer had to fight to the death in order to maintain access to resources and markets to maintain itself. However, the economic situation that existed after the end of World War II has changed drastically in the last 70 years. We have seen the rise of China as the biggest upset in this international order. China has been the biggest beneficiary of the United States Bretton Woods system. It has no ability to project power, so it would never be able to maintain the trade relationships that it currently has. It would never be able to maintain the impressive growth rates that it has for the past couple decades without that Bretton Woods system, without the United States guaranteeing international shipping and guaranteeing a certain international norm. And as such, you could say China is the one that has taken the most advantage of this system. The trade deficit is $335.4 billion in favor of China, between the United States and China. So the United States exports $129.9 billion worth of goods to China, but it imports $505.5 billion. So like I said, a deficit of $1/3 trillion. As the United States' share of global GDP has declined, we have seen its position as global guarantor of international security also declining. The United States no longer has the ability to project power in the same way that it once did. Previously, up until Barack Obama's presidency, the United States military had held a goal that it should be able to fight 2 wars on opposite fronts. So one in the Pacific, one in the Atlantic, right? It was meant to be able to fight a war like World War II at any time. Under Barack Obama's presidency, that was reduced. It would fight 1 war and a holding action somewhere else. That was the military capability that it believed it could achieve. So it could defeat one person while holding a stalemate against another power. This has now dwindled again to where you could really just say the United States can fight 1 war with 1 power at one time. As China increases its defense spending, as they bring on more carriers, as they modernize the carrier that they have, as they push to project power into the South China Sea and the Spratly Islands, we are seeing that more and more nations are realizing that the Bretton Woods system is not the same as it once was, and both Europe and Japan are being asked to increase defense spending of their own so that they can help the United States continue its security guarantee. Other countries are reluctant to increase their defense spending because for so long they have received that for free from the United States. However, reality is reality. And so I think we will continue to see Japan remilitarizing, and Europe is going to try to form its own European army, as already has been discussed by Macron and others. And I think as long as the United States maintains friendly relationships with Japan and Europe, which it seems likely to do, then this won't be a threat to international security. However, China does seem to be more interested in setting up its own international system, its own security guarantees. Right now, it's going to be focused mainly on securing East Asia, the Malacca Straits, trade into the Indian Ocean, the Belt and Road Initiative, the Silk Road across Asia and into the Middle East and Europe. And that rival system no longer is in the benefit of the United States. And so the United States is retracting the Bretton Woods security guarantee from China. China no longer needs the security guarantee on one hand, and the United States no longer wants to accept a third of $1 trillion deficit. And so now we have a trade war going on. Now, it's a complicated issue. Normally, as a capitalist, I don't like the idea of tariffs and trade wars. They create economic inefficiency, let alone the destabilizing of international politics. But they may be a necessary evil at times. They are a necessary tool to enforce policy on other nations. And so as China has taken advantage of the Bretton Woods system to grow strong, it does make sense for the United States to rescind that agreement. And so now there's tariffs on Chinese goods. Now, there's no real way for China to win this fight because China exports far more, almost 4 times as much to the United States as the United States sends back. So just at an obvious first glance, China has much more to lose than the United States does. And China is also trying to keep growth rates high so that it doesn't fall into the middle income trap, which maybe we'll make another video about later. But it wants to join the first world nations, not just be a second world nation with a per capita GDP of maybe $10,000, which is where it's at right now, but it wants to be on a Western level. Well, that's going to be harder and harder to do if you can't export to the United States. There is no other market. Where is China going to replace $500 billion of exports? Is it going to export to India? India doesn't have a very wealthy middle class. Is it going to export to Europe? Maybe, but it already does export to Europe as much as Europe is willing to take in, and Europe will always be more allied with the United States than with China. So when push comes to shove, Europe isn't really going to be a reliable trading partner while China is in a trade war with the United States. China could make up some of that market loss by moving into Africa, which we are seeing. But again, Africa does not have a large middle class. For the foreseeable future, the market is the United States and to a lesser degree the Western Hemisphere, which is under the sphere of influence of the United States. Now, on the right side of the political spectrum, we support the United States and Europe and Japan, the Western Alliance. That's what we support here. We are unapologetic Europhiles, unapologetic Western chauvinists. But on the left, these people blindly support the Chinese Communist Party for some unfathomable reason. Now, I have heard some very dismissive things from the left, and they say, oh, well, China can easily win this trade war. All they have to do is increase, a Keynesian economic stimulus. That's ridiculous, okay? China cannot replace $500 billion of imports every single year with a $500 billion stimulus plan every single year. You can see where that would be a problem. And if you believe that you can just print $500 billion out of nowhere and it doesn't affect anything, well, then why don't you just print 10 trillion, 20 trillion? Why doesn't everyone just print themselves into being quadrillionaires? I mean, you could just make up paper money out of thin air, right? There's no consequence, right? Well, of course, there's consequence. So if China wants to replace the United States as a market with paper money pulled from nowhere, it's going to destroy its own internal economy. The standard of living for its citizens will go down. Now, so basically, it can paper over the losses, but it will have to draw value out of its citizens. Now, this may be the best China can do. It doesn't really have a solution for this problem. Let's project this out into a few decades into the future. We see the demographic collapse, or the demographic inversion, if you will. It's happening in Europe, but it's even worse in China and Japan, where the elderly population is going to far outnumber the younger and middle-aged population that will be producing wealth. So as more and more of its population stops producing and starts withdrawing resources in their retirement, it's withdrawing money out of the economy without putting back in. And the only advanced economy where there isn't a demographic inversion is in the United States, where there is enough immigration, there's enough internal birth that there won't be an overly burdensome population retiring and withdrawing all the money out of the economy. At least it's not going to be anywhere near as bad as it is in Europe and China and Japan. Now again, over the course of the next few decades, maybe India and Africa can rise and grow in wealth and become a market themselves. But China will still have to compete for those markets alongside nations like the United States, Europe, and Japan. So the Western alliance still has the advantage. China can't replace the market that is the United States. There are no markets on the horizon that can rise up to its wealth. Not anytime soon, maybe in the far future, maybe after 2050, 2100, sure. And maybe China will still surpass the United States in terms of nominal GDP, but it won't be able to surpass the United States in terms of per capita GDP. It will never be able to get out. It's already kind of admitting that it won't be able to get out of the middle income trap. We have seen the rhetoric from the Chinese to its own people change. It's no longer telling the people that it's going to get rich. It's telling their people to prepare for being middle income. That, their standard of living has increased, and that's good, and they'll continue increasing that as they can and trying to bring those benefits into the rural population, not just the coastal urban population. I do believe and hope that they will have some success with that, but they won't be able to have a per capita standard of living anywhere near the United States or Europe for the foreseeable future. And so I think the international system will maintain itself with small adjustments. Like I said, Europe, Japan, they're going to have to contribute to the security guarantee more. But the United States, as the sole market left standing, as everyone else ages out of productivity, means that the United States can maintain this international system for some time to come.